This lesson is about PHP programming and, in particular, how to use Ajax technologies with PHP. So, to get started, just to review what is jQuery. jQuery is a JavaScript library that provides some easy functionality for interacting with HTML and CSS. jQuery can either be downloaded and stored locally, or it can be accessed via CDN, an online content delivery network. Just as a review, some jQuery commands that we've talked about in the past. We've talked about ready, HTML, which gets the HTML of an element, val, which gets the value of an input, um, attribute, which gets the value or sets the value of an attribute. And then things like find, append, prepend, before, and after are all used for working in the DOM and manipulating the DOM inside of a document. Up top, you'll see that there is a link to jQuery basics and jQuery DOM work, should you need to review that. We're not really focusing on the DOM right now. We'll come back to that later. But the basics of jQuery are going to be something that you want to remember. Um, and we've talked about Ajax in the past before as well. What is Ajax? Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And what it is a way to send requests to a server or to a data format behind the scenes while your web page is still functioning. jQuery is not necessary for Ajax. Ajax can be written straight inside of JavaScript, but it is much easier inside of Ajax. And here you'll see a typical Ajax request for an XML document. And so we've got the Ajax request, and then we talk about the type, and the type was get, and the URL is the file we were looking at, which was info.xml, and the data type was XML. And if it was successful, then we had a function which got a response, which was all the XML. And if there was an error, then we issued an error message. Things will change a little bit when we get into PHP. The first thing that changes is that the type goes from get to post. The second thing is that we'll be sending this to a URL that is a PHP page and not an XML page. The third is that instead of a data type, we'll be sending data. In other words, we're going to be able to send information to that PHP page through a post array. And then finally, what's coming back is only whatever the PHP script echoes, as opposed to all of the XML that we used to get back and had to then parse through. Um, this also then means that we can, on that PHP page, use the data coming in to write a query that goes into a database and then only return the information that we're concerned with. So here's an example of how this might work. So on index.php, you'll see that I've got a create UN button somewhere. It's got an ID of create UN, and when that is clicked, this Ajax operates. So once again, the type is post. We're going to process.php. I'm going to go into the document and find the ID of name, which is an input, and get its value, and find the ID of phone, which is an input, and get its value, and store those in the post array under the keys name and phone. Um, when and if this is successful, the response will just output a username or alert a username, and otherwise it will tell us there's an error contacting the server. So when that button gets clicked on our web page, behind the scenes, Ajax runs this request to process.php. Now, if we look at the right, we'll see what happens. Uh, the post array comes across with keys name and phone, which I'm storing in local PHP variables name and phone. The username then is going to become starting with a substring of the first four digits of their name. And then I'm going to substring the last four digits of their phone number onto that. And then I echo the username. Coming back over here then to the response to the success function, this response variable is only what was echoed. So now we can alert your username is response, and it's going to echo the username that was created. Um, and so that gives us a lot of things that we can do. The other thing that happens here is that if we were to include a session over here, we could then also utilize session variables in that PHP. One of the important things to note, though, is that once this page loads over here, once this index.php loads, the only way that JavaScript can interact with PHP is through Ajax, through reaching out to another PHP page. Because over here, once this JavaScript has loaded, that means the PHP on that page has finished doing its job. So the only way that we can get JavaScript to interact with PHP is through this Ajax format. Now we're going to take that Ajax and PHP interaction, and we're going to add a little bit of MySQL. So I've got the same setup happening over here on the left, but process.php is doing something a little different. So what we're doing is, again, is the post is coming through with the name and the phone number, and then I'm creating a username. And now what I'm doing is I'm going and calling a SQL command saying update my users, set username equal to username where I have this name and this phone. And then I run that query. That query is stored in result. Now, when we're doing a request for information, a select, that result then stores information. But the result also then can be used to tell us whether or not our query or our update was effective. So now what I can do is I can say if dbcon affected rows is greater than 0, then I know it was successful and I can echo my username. Otherwise, I echo -1. So coming back to success, the Ajax was successful regardless of whether or not the the database got updated. That's a completely separate issue. So success to Ajax just means, hey, I called this page, the call to that page worked, and I'm getting information back if you're sending information back. So what I'm doing here now is I'm saying if the response is not equal to -1, that means that my database update was successful, and I can tell them what their username was. And if I got something else, if I got a -1 back, then I can alert that there was some kind of error in the database work. So I have to kind of do that piece of it on my own. Um, there's one other option, well, not one other option, but one other important option that we can use inside of the Ajax call, and that is async. So again, Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. So it's designed to work in an asynchronous fashion. In other words, it happens in the background while other things on the page are happening. There are times where you do not want that to happen, where you want that Ajax call to complete prior to anything else on the page occurring. And one such example of that might be is if in this success some other Ajax call was happening. And so if they're happening concurrently and they're happening asynchronously, then too much is happening at one time. I need this response to happen before an interior Ajax gets called. So one of the things that we can do here is occasionally we add async false as an option in the Ajax call, and what that does is that stops all other code from executing until this Ajax call finishes. So that is something that you may need at some point in time. So here's a practice problem. Again, we're going to create a form that asks for their name and their phone number, and we're going to save that. And when we click the submit button, we're going to trigger an Ajax call to process.php, and we're going to send that name and phone number over. Process.php is going to get the ASCII value of the name, and it's going to sum the digits of the phone number. If the ASCII value divided by 10 is bigger than the sum, the user's an admin, and otherwise they're not. Echo the information back to info. Based on the response from process, info.php should show a message that states if the user is or is not an admin. So again, we're doing that without ever leaving info.php. We're working in the background and then using jQuery or an alert to show that. And at the bottom here, you'll find two sample sets of test data that will end their responses. Another set of practice problems is available here on the web page. I strongly encourage you to do that, especially the second set, the level 2 problems, because those level 2 problems are the ones that engage the MySQL piece of this as well on the PHP side and kind of completes all of the communication that we want to have. Once again, we're not at this point worried about manipulating things using the DOM. So if you don't remember the jQuery DOM, that's not a big deal. But you do need some basic jQuery knowledge in terms of events and basic properties so that we can interact with the HTML that's up there. But again, those practice problems, level 2, are going to be really important in preparing for upcoming assignments. Thanks and good luck.